start?
Might as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm excited to announce our BSA Urban Design panel today. For people who do not know the BSA, who doesn't know the BSA? Hands up. Aye. It stands for the Boston Society of Architects, and our urban design program explores big ideas about cities, planning, transit, landscape, policy, and design. My name is Isabel Sempel, and I'm a landscape architect and principal with Sasaki, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the BSA Urban Design Committee. And we share a passion for the intersection of design, place, and community. Our goal is to create a varied program reflecting the diversity of our own interests, but more importantly, reflecting a diversity of topics, a diversity of stakeholder groups, and a diversity of urban settings. Today's panel talk will look into forms of creative placemaking and tactical urbanism, what it is, how does it change the public realm, and how do people interact with it. It's with great pleasure that I want to introduce the moderator of today's talk, Christina Lanzo. She sits right here next to me. Christina is the director of the Urban Culture Institute and recipient of the 2017 Business Woman Award from CV Magazine for Best Women-Run Arts and Culture Initiatives 2017 in the Northeastern United States. So congratulations. She teaches in the Department of Architecture at Wentworth Institute of Technology and founded the BSA Placemaking Network in 2008, for which she serves as a co-chair. Christina is a seasoned public art consultant and cultural planner with more than 20 years of experience, working with public and private sector clients, cultural institutions, communities, and professionals in the creative sector to improve the quality of life. She has administered over 100 permanent and temporary public art initiatives. Committed to design excellence, Christina believes in the value of active public places, the arts in the community, research, and education. She regularly presents and publishes on the arts and culture, including tactical urbanism. Christina is an active 22-year resident of the Fort Point Arts Community in Boston and sits on the board of Culture Now, an online public art resource based in New York City. She received her Master of Arts in Art History from Boston University and earned her PhD with a concentration in public art from the University of Munich. With that, I welcome Christina to take over the panel for today.
Thank you, Isabel. So it was definitely a really great honor to receive the call, or the email actually. Nowadays we communicate with the email. Of course, Isa sending me this email saying, hey, Christina, we need you to moderate this panel. And I look at the list of speakers and I think, wow, my favorite people. I can't say no, even though we have open studios in Fort Point that weekend. So here we are. I'm honored to speak. We're in Fort Point, but tactical urbanism and placemaking. I just want to say 2 or 3 words about placemaking in terms of a definition. It's a term that really kind of came into being maybe 10, 15 years ago, but key authors have been publishing for much longer. Jan Gehl, 1970s, Life Between Buildings. He's a Danish urban planner. Of course, William Hawley White from New York. He wrote A Social Life of Small Public Spaces in the 1970s, another research project where he literally looked at New York City plazas like the Seagram building and decided and determined through empirical research why these places were working and then others why they didn't work. And he published this beautiful book about it. So ultimately, I think that's, to me, is the beginning of placemaking. Think about how social active uses are being experienced in these places. And then tactical urbanism is actually something I would say we could say thank you to Mike Lydon. He actually is somebody who I greatly admire. I actually met him in person in Memphis a couple years ago. We were on a symposium together. But he published a book literally called Tactical Urbanism in 2011. It was an electronic resource, freeware, as they say, for everybody to look at, with about a dozen kind of case study examples of how to really turn neighborhood around, without budget, basically. It was a grassroots kind of radical kind of approach, how to make better neighborhoods, basically. Engaging neighbors and putting out, furniture made out of plywood, anything you would like, pallets, really, really cheap stuff. And I've participated in a few of them, and they are totally addictive. They really are. The energy of those things is amazing. So how many of you have heard of this book or any Mike Lydon? Great. Okay, so we're all kind of in a know here. So that's kind of how I want to frame our discussion. And so I wanted to introduce our panelists. And they are, to my immediate, right, your left, David Nagahiro. And David is a principal and master planner of the Hub, so he actually designed the Plaza, except for the pavilions. I'm told they were shipped to Boston directly from Art Basel, Switzerland, so another art fair, basically. But David is a principal at CBT and has 30 years of experience across a broad spectrum of urban design, architecture, and area design projects. David has led a number of urban design and complex mixed-use architecture projects that have been catalysts for the revitalization of undeveloped, underutilized, and neglected urban sites. His holistic design sensibility and intuitive thinking at multiple scales brings a comprehensive vision to practicality approach to master planning, and his extensive experience leading multidisciplinary teams has resulted in creative and innovative solutions to complex urban design and planning challenges. Recognized for his design excellence, David is also passionate about sustainability in all aspects of design. He's a past Roche Traveling Scholar, and in 1999 was one of 5 recipients honored with a National Young Architects Award from the American Institute of Architects. David has received his Bachelor of Architecture from Washington State University and attended the Architectural Studies program at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. Welcome, David. Then we have Christine Dunn. She's the newly coined chair of arts and culture at Sasaki, but she's also a principal there. And I guess Julie had a little influence here since she's arrived, right, with her title. So Christine is a senior design architect with over 20 years of experience collaborating across the disciplines of architecture, landscape design, and planning. Christine's practice centers on working with mission-based clients engaged in the arts, culture, education, commercial, and civic realms. Christine has a passion for working within urban communities on design strategies that support local equity, as well as nonprofits and institutions that work to advance diverse economic development, education, technology, sustainability, and ultimately serve the common good. Christine is a member of the American Institute of Architects and several others, Urban Land Institute, BSA, of course, and she's actually on the BSA board. She's going to actually officially moderate a panel on a new manifesto, placemaking manifesto we're issuing at the BSA next Monday. I have handouts here if you want to see them at the end of the show. Come on down. And of course, she's on the board of the Sasaki Foundation. Thank you. Great career, great friend. Great having you. I love Christine. I love them all. So here's Julie, my next love. She's the Chief of Arts and Culture for the City of Boston, a cabinet-level position reporting directly to Mayor Martin J. Walsh. The Arts Cabinet includes the Boston Public Library and the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. As the department head for the very multifaceted MOAC, she leads Boston Creates, the cultural plan for Boston, the Boston Cultural Council, which makes grants to artists and organizations, and the Boston Art Commission, which commissions and approves public art. Other programs include art exhibitions at City Hall, the Poet Laureate Program, and the operation of the Historic Strand Theater in Dorchester. Julie was trained as an urban planner and is a 20-year veteran of municipal government public service. Prior to moving to Boston in late 2014, she served as the Director of Culture Planning for the City of Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs since 2000. Thank you. Then Janet. Wow, we go way back too. So do we with Chris. Janet is an artist who defies categorization. She creates billowing sculptures at the scale of buildings, choreographed by wind and light. The art shifts from being an object you look at to a living environment you can get lost in. Using unlikely materials from netting to atomized water particles, Eckelmann combines ancient craft with cutting-edge engineering and material science to create focal points for urban life on 5 continents. She was named Architectural Digest Innovator for changing the very essence of urban spaces. She's been on TED Talk for many years, And, well, her path has been non-linear. After graduating from Harvard, she applied to 7 art schools and was rejected by all of them. So she decided to create a life as an artist for herself. And so for 5 years, she painted in a Balinese village, studying craft traditions. And that's where she actually learned how to make the nets. She didn't find full voice as an artist until her paints went missing on a Fulbright in India, which forced her to embrace an unorthodox new art material. Then I would say we move on to Chris. Chris, my friend Chris, was trained as an architect and a jazz musician at Princeton and MIT. Combining these 2 disciplines, he sometimes tries to make architecture more like music, more spontaneous and alive, as in his musical urban instruments. At other times, he attempts to make music more like architecture, more physical, more visual, as in his performance Heartbeat with Mikhail Baryshnikov. Chris received his MS in environmental art at MIT and actually wrote his thesis under Autopine on Soundstair. He's designed numerous permanent interactive installations in the US and Europe, from the scoreboard of the Miami Heat Arena to Rainbow Cove at Logan Airport here in Boston. And then, of course, he's done installations of Sonic Forest at major music festivals, including Bonnaroo, Coachella, Wireless, Electric Daisy Carnival, Glastonbury, on and on and on. Very active. He's received the Thomas Edison Award for Innovation Design from General Electric and the Georgi Kippis Prize from MIT. And he's run his own multimedia studio, Phenomenon Arts, since 1980, with facilities both in Lexington and London. Well, I think we're good to go. So, I'm going to fast forward. We just explained all this. Moderator, panelists, and, well, we're going to have David Starr talk about his work in tactical urbanism. And what we're doing is we're going to be really fierce. I'm going to push the button every 30 seconds, so go.
Okay. So this, first, we've been involved with HUBweek for the 3rd year now. This was the inception. This is Workbeat, which was held at Atlantic Wharf. We basically took over the entire Atlantic Wharf area. What you see there.
Can you hear?
Okay. The second one is Housing the Hub. This was the 2nd year we were involved, and this was really looking at dealing with or addressing affordable housing in Boston, the housing shortage. We proposed 5 different ideas: building it small, building it tall, building it modular, building it in unusual places, building it here, and then building it together, the idea of building with policy, design, and finance at the same time. This was the part of the outreach for Housing the Hub that last year. Basically, the outreach was really trying to survey the different community members who came to the exhibit to find out what they thought about the 5 different ideas that we were proposing, as a means of really trying to understand how to create more affordable housing within Boston. On the left-hand side is an image of the exhibit at night. What was interesting as a takeaway is when we wore the Housing the Hub t-shirts, people thought we were selling them something, and so we decided to wear the plain clothes, and people were much more approachable. We had a speaker series for the 5 days. Max spoke from the City for the iLab, Natalia spoke on Imagine Boston 2030, Julie spoke on arts in the city as far as art housing, and then Kara spoke on housing policy. We brought in innovations of augmented reality and virtual reality into the site, and it was a really great exhibition last year. This year we were the master planners for HUBweek, and it was really the idea of bringing the arts, innovation, the science and technology into the same location. I think within our city, the innovation happens all over the place and very isolated. This was the first opportunity to bring, as a 4-day festival, all of this innovation together in one location. We started off with 3 domes and 50 containers. We ended up with 6 domes and 80 containers for the overall planning. Talk a little bit about the construction. We working with Free Domes out of Poland, and also looking at the overall containers with a container company called Mini Warehousing. High Output was the one that ended up wiring the whole place. There are miles of wiring, and Lee Kennedy was a general contractor that really brought everything together. It took about 6 days to build this out. It took about 9 months to put the overall design together. The next is temporary modular housing that we're looking at Davis Square in Somerville. This is a very unique sort of tactical urbanism. The idea that instead of 5 days or 5 months, this is thinking about 5 years of temporary housing, affordable, sustainable, modular housing that's net zero, and bringing it to underutilized spaces like parking lots. The idea of building these out, when the space was actually going to be used, we would take this and now move it to another site. Back to the HUBweek master plan, some of the challenges that we have. When you look at this site, underneath you right now is the orange and green line tunnel. And so we had a real capacity issue. So the cranes were strategically located to place the containers and the domes into place without any issues. We also had fire lane issues and accessibility issues. So with a great challenge, we brought it all together at the end of the day.
So, thank you, David. It was such a pleasure for our team to work with the CBT team on this incredible feat that they pulled off in planning the HUBweek festival here on the. We got to see some behind-the-scenes aspects of the complexities of pulling this all together, and it's really great to be here to see it live in person. We were involved a little bit at the beginning in. One of the things that we worked on was imagining what we could do with the center piece here, the triangular hub of the hub, if you will. And we imagined this as something that we call the eye of the storm, which was supposed to be kind of a quiet respite away from the hub of HUBweek. And so it was imagined as this immersive experience, as if you're walking into a cloud, and you could go in there and sit down and just kind of take a moment, check your email, and just kind of contemplate on the things that you're learning here at HUBweek. And so what we ended up doing was collaborating with the fabulous video artist, UNU. And she imagined a videoscape within the hub that speaks about climate change and sea rise. And so, unfortunately, we didn't have the budget to build this year, but we do have a VR experience around the corner, and I invite you all to go check that out. Another project that we worked on that you might be familiar with is the Lawn on D over by the Boston Convention Center. And this was a strategy of utilizing an empty lot to create a place where there wasn't a place while development was going up around the convention center. This lot is set aside to be the new place for expanding the convention center. So originally intended to be kind of a one-year installation, but through the amazing programming that has happened there, this has really become a landmark. You can't come to Boston and not hear about the Lawn on D. So it's going to be really interesting to see, now that the expansion plans are going forward for the BCDC, what will become of Lawn on D, right? You can't not have a park there now. So this is going to be really great. Another small project that we've been working on is called Winterlight Pavilion, and this is a research project that we've been doing around how to activate the Boston public realm during the winter, right? When people don't want to spend time outside. So this is a parametrically designed igloo. It's a glow-in-the-dark igloo made of concrete blocks. It can be assembled and disassembled and reassembled, and it has a fire pit on the inside. And one more project, is our Kit of Parks, which is a mobile park. It was fabricated in our Fab Lab, and it fits together like a big puzzle. And you can take it anywhere on a bicycle on this cart and unpack it, and it's an instant park. So I think that's it for the Sasaki team.
Great. So I'm Julie. And Boston is a city that really powerfully believes in the transformative power of the arts, so much so that they advocated for the creation of a cultural plan for the city in the Walsh administration. It's called Boston Creates. And we really embrace the fact that everybody has an impulse for creative expression. And this plan identified some of the challenges and some of the opportunities and articulated 5 goals for strengthening the city and helping everyone achieve their creative potential. One of our signature projects in implementing this plan is called Boston Air. Air is for artists in residence, and it's also symbolic that we wish to work with, that our work with artists in city government is as common as the air that we breathe, and that artists also can breathe a breath of fresh air into the work of municipal government, how we go about the work of city government. We're very much inspired by this artist, Merle Laderman-Ukeles, sorry. She was in residence in the New York City Sanitation Department for about 40 years. And she really set up this manifesto of what does it mean to be an artist in residence in a city government agency, conceptual artist, and then executing work where she shook the hand of every sanitation worker, where she took city government documents and read them and empowered them as really understanding what government does from this artistic point of view. We had a first round of artists who were in residence in various city departments. Lemerchi Fraser with Women's Advancement and Office of Recovery, Shapong Liu with the Police Department, and Shapong conceived of this project Code Listen, where police and teens were making music together to really use music to reframe the dialogue about violence and recovering from trauma. In our second round of Boston Air, we worked with 10 artists who were rooted in community, really looking at civic practice through the lens of so many different disciplines and practices in neighborhoods. Their work just wrapped up, and you can see that they really range in age and disciplines, and we're also very inspired to tell our story through film. So we have actually documentary film that talks about what did each of these artists do during their residency. One of them is a woman named Maria Molteni, who was in residence in the Perkins BCYF Center in Dorchester, and Harambe Park is right next door. Her artwork actually really is very informed by her love of basketball, and she worked with teens and youth to reconceive this basketball court and reinvent it. And this is actually a great example of tactical urbanism, to reinvent this basketball court in a way that really reflects what the youth in the area are thinking of. And so finally, we have funding for another round of artist residencies. If there are any artists in the audience now, the call for artists is out. And our third round of Boston Air is actually very influenced by the Boston Resiliency Plan. It is all about the framing of resilience and racial equity. And so we're really looking for artists whose work wants to deeply explore issues of equity, racial equity in Boston through the arts and through art making. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. I'm Gianna Decalin. I'm an artist who is very happy to have my studio here in Boston. I was asked to bring some examples of tactical urbanism and creative placemaking and share some strategies. What you're looking at is downtown Phoenix, Arizona. When I first arrived for a site visit, that was all parking lots and one very notorious strip club. And this is a city in North Carolina, Greensboro, which had a very important role in the civil rights movement. And my goal was to create a place that would draw people together based on the history of their city, which is the hub of 6 railroad lines. And that form that you see is tracing those paths with their city at the center, and various cultural and racial communities came together along those routes in the textile mills. What you're seeing here is the city of Santa Monica wanted to create an identity for their city based on culture, and they decided that every 3 years they would have a festival for one night and utilize the beach. And they offered me to work with the Department of Public Works. So I went out with all the guys and their bulldozers, and we began reshaping the sand. And as people came, they moved the sand around with their feet and their body, becoming part of the artwork and being co-creators. This is a project you're looking at that has been traveling to 5 continents so far. On the left is Montreal. That is the transformation of a park that was full of syringes every morning. It was a dangerous place for local residents, and it has been completely transformed, and the homeless residents are now employed there in the organic garden. And now you're looking at London. The Mayor of London shut down the busiest intersection in the entire city, Oxford Circus, where Oxford and Regent Street meet, and they made the tube station there, T, exit only. And it allowed people to come and flood there and take the roads back for people. And people started lying down in the street. And this is a city that a few of you know and love, as do I. This is a site which was created as a result of the Big Dig, called the Boston Greenway, or the Rose Kennedy Greenway. And my goal was to stitch the city back together. As a child, I had taken twine and made Jacob's ladder, and that was the idea. And this is a piece that some of you might, how many people actually experienced this piece? Oh, that's so great. And the last project I'm going to share with you is, this is Vancouver in British Columbia along their waterfront. This is stretching 750 feet between their convention center and the top of a major skyscraper. And members of the public were invited and able to use their cell phones, any kind, and they could co-create the work by selecting colors and making gestures. On to you.
That's me then.
Thank you.
That was great. Okay, last, I'm Christopher Janney, an architect, trained as an architect and a composer. How many of you have been to the Boston Museum of Science? Yes, okay. The sound stair, the musical staircase. Okay, that was my thesis at MIT in the late 70s. Okay. And here you see it on the Spanish Steps in Rome, and also on the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So that piece is very much my idea of what we now call tactical urbanism, how it travels around, plugs into existing architecture. This is a little less pluggable. This is a permanent installation, actually the scoreboard of the Miami Heat Arena, where I designed it as a giant underwater anemone, but it also has interactive components where as the louder the people yell, it changes color, and at a certain moment in the opening, it actually fires off confetti and all kinds of nice other effects. This one, with the Whistle Grove, this is the National Steamboat Monument in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's the home of where they built the Delta Queen Corporation built a lot of those boats that went up and down the Mississippi. So actually, this is an interactive light and sound and steam installation that is right on the water's edge. There's also a festival they have every 4 years. So I composed this piece where a live saxophone player, actually playing an electronic saxophone, can actually play the fountain together with the Cincinnati Pops. This one here, Sonic Forest, this is both the piece that I think Christina mentioned. It has toured to a number of major music festivals. It also has a permanent installation in Zaragoza, Spain, where they had a World's Fair and then the city purchased it. But is that idea of also creating interactive environments that actually catalyze people's interactivity with one another, what I call a social foil. This is also a good example of my social foil. This is in the New York City subway, the 34th Street station, called Reach, and this is where people reach up and trigger light and sound. I'm sorry I can't show you a picture of sound. It hasn't been invented yet, but nevertheless, understand that it's in that sense of an urban musical instrument. It's a place where total strangers interact with one another for maybe 10, 12 seconds, get on the subway, and starts all over again. This one, Touch My Building, is both a permanent installation on the left and a series of temporary installations where essentially there's a series of places on the buildings where you can touch the building and it will trigger light and sound. But again, that idea of creating a social foil, but also you see up there, there's a riddle. And for those people who want to return and try to discover, they bring their friends and they try to understand the pattern that it wants to play. If you do that, it unlocks and the whole building plays itself for about 10 seconds. This last one, East Carolina University, called Sonic Plaza. This is a series of installations along a walkway. You can see where the students did a dance composition with the water wall there, and then on your far right is the media glockenspiel. This is also now a course at East Carolina University where different students from different departments, dance, media arts, music, can interact together and create pieces on the installation.
Well, and I took the liberty to also throw in a couple of my projects. So this is actually Berlin Kulturpark, was basically trying to revitalize an abandoned theme park that had been shut down from the neighboring communities for, well, 10 years when I arrived. This is actually then a think tank I organized there. And the goal was to pretty much end the stalemate, because the problem was that after the reunification, there was sort of this commercial attempt that completely failed, and then hence the closure. And so we pretty much brought together all the leaders from the administration. We brought artists from the States and from Germany and from actually around the world to Berlin to talk about programming there. And the third was, of course, how do we fix the financial problem of this park? And so we sort of published this executive summary, which was then distributed to everybody on the sort of grassroots level. And lo and behold, they're now doing the master plan, and this really famous German architect, Lutz Partners, is doing it. I'm going back at the end of November to talk about potential programming. This right here I'm working on in Portland, Maine, that is. Another wonderful city. And Matthew Mazzotta is another one of those really famous kind of tactical urbanism people who works with these living room installations. We're going to install something there that's going to be there for a year next year in June. So come to Portland next year in June. Something exciting is going to happen. Usually builds things like meeting spaces. This is Harbor Arts. I did this a couple of years ago. And a total grassroots initiative. This fish you might have seen, it was actually on the East Boston Wharf. And it's by this guy, Steve Israel, who had a bunch of people there and just decided, I want to have an exhibit. And we decided it's going to be an international exhibit. So we brought artists from all over the world, 40 artists, who showed there for $500. Basically, hardly covered shipping, but that's what we did. And everybody loved it. I met some really cool artists that way. And South Main Mosaic is something I did in Memphis. I was in Memphis for a couple of years to run the public art program there, and I was the co-curator of this kind of tactical urbanism initiative. Same thing, lots of empty storefronts. So we had mural paintings, just trying to activate the spaces, and that was actually the symposium in the context of Mike Lydom at that time too. And this finally is actually something that's in the planning phase right now at the new Boston Children's Hospital Tower on the Longwood campus. And so this is an artist, Sue Sunny Park, who does these incredible kind of light installations that are sculptures. And they're just reflecting light from these refracted plexiglass visual stimulators. And then lastly, this is kind of something that fits totally into HUBweek here. Jason Bruges is a London artist, also trained as an architect, but he now mostly does light design, and he does these incredible animations, also again LED activated sensors that will travel with you as you go along. It will be like this sort of flower garden that will kind of activate along this hallway at the new Children's Hospital. So that's about it. So next what we're going to do is we're going to have 10 minutes of questions. We prepared these 3 kind of questions for everybody on the panel to answer to, and then we want to open it up to answers to the audience, to you. One of the questions that we discussed during our preparations was that we definitely want to acknowledge the setting here. We're at HUBweek, and we want to ask the question, what is the role of the city in placemaking and tactical urbanism? Since we're now in our 3rd year, the festival is an enormously involved platform that offers opportunity for engagement. And we want to recognize this evolution and asking, is placemaking and tactical urbanism a community-driven approach, or does the city provide a platform? Or how does the city remove obstacles that may not even be able to be aware of?
Yeah,
Julie?
I'll jump in on that one. So, as you know, I work in city government, and we work really closely with so many different partner agencies. And one of the things we heard so strongly during our cultural plan process is, city government does not make it easy to do creative things. So what we've really done very deliberately is work to remove those obstacles, remove those barriers, and we're going to continue to do that. We know we have a lot of improvement to do. So just first of all saying yes, right? That yes, use City Hall Plaza, reinvent this place, welcoming artists into City Hall to do site-specific, really creative, inventive things. And then also, what we've done as part of implementing Boston Creates is we've hired a person on my staff who is a point person. She's got a special phone number. Her name's Julia Ryan. Her phone number is 635-ARTS. I love to call this the bat phone for the arts. Any artists, anyone creative, they're always pushing the boundary. Do they need approval? Do I need permit? How do I get the city to say yes? And so they have a dedicated person to talk to and figure out how to make their project a reality. So government does play a role in getting out of the way, making it easier, funding, low risk, small, rapid turnaround grants to help people realize their creative projects. So I'd say that that's one of the most important roles that government can play.
Anybody else? Actually, maybe we'll sort of pass it on to David, since you've worked on the master plan. Do you want to sort of respond to that? City government or city's role in urban planning, city spaces, places?
I think as an urban designer and master plan, I think Julie has been had a tremendous impact in changing the nature of the way we think about our public spaces. City Hall Plaza in particular, this was designed in the the 60s, and it was really a windswept space that was intended to be a really active place, but unfortunately over time really hasn't had the opportunity. We can only win so many championships before we fill City Hall Plaza, and we've been fortunate to do those over the decade. But I think now with Julie in place, it's really thinking about it. And then before it used to be things like farmers markets, but I think there are much more interesting things like art and the idea of using these places for soapboxes to really identify innovation like we have for HUBweek.
And so yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the beautiful things too that's happened since Julie came to Boston. I mean, she's really kind of connecting the dots. But Christine?
I have a question, actually. I'm going to budge in, and I actually am curious. I mean, you guys both have worked in so many different cities, and I wonder if you have a perspective about, like, what's that common thing that helps, that makes the difference in getting a project done in all the different cities you've worked in. I mean, it was cool you worked with Public Works. That's cool.
That was actually that's what drew me in, like the chance to really, bond and work with what Public Works does. I'll share that the city of Santa Monica created a 24-hour suspension of all regular permit requirements. And that's how they're able to do that. It's like, you need leadership from the top, which we have here with Julie and the mayor, just even, and you hearing Julie talk about her vision, that's what it takes. And everybody is used to a certain way of doing things, and the idea that for art, things can temporarily change.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I think especially for temporary installations, City Hall, we used to have first night here. And actually, when I was here in the mid-'70s, it was twice a year where artists could do public projects for first night, and then also what was then the Cambridge River Festival. So as an artist who was interested in executing public art, not just designing it, we had sort of two vehicles. So, and I found this in other cities, where the city will create a vehicle for artists to actually create projects or temporary projects, and that with that endorsement and that kind of support, you're able to really get down to making the art.
The one thing I wanted to add on that is that, like that park I showed you in Montreal, like using art and placemaking turned out to be the absolutely most robust way to combat drug problem and crime problems, so in a much more cost-effective manner. So sometimes letting the arts czar play a role and sit at the table with the other, this is how we make our cities the places we want to live.
I'd just like to add the point that as somebody who's trying to get a couple projects off the ground and trying to seek funding, I wonder, what is the role that philanthropy can play in partnership with the city to encourage these projects to happen? Julie, I don't know if there are any good examples of that in Boston, but I know Chicago for sure has some great examples.
Yeah, I think having a cultural plan really helps set the stage for collaborations of this sort. And what we've seen since Boston Creates was issued is that philanthropy have partnered. As a matter of fact, the Barr Foundation, the Boston Foundation, neither of which really had open applications for artists or art making or new works, now have collaborated on Live Arts Boston, where they're taking in applications. Even that, opening the door, was a huge, huge change. And this is for the performing arts, which wasn't getting much funding, and it's a significant amount of money. Live Arts Boston, the second round just opened up, I think, Friday, and it's really a game changer for people who are doing new works and trying to get their career off the ground.
Well, I think that's kind of a nice array of responses to that question. Yes, I mean, it definitely does take leadership. It comes and falls with leadership. And then, yes, of course, it also takes an inspired sort of citizenship and active citizens and people who want to do things, ultimately. Another question that we kind of talked about in getting ready for today's panel was there's sort of this shift in tactical urbanism as a strategy. I mentioned Mike Lydon's book, and that was really kind of all about grassroots participation and very, very, very low budgets. But you're kind of seeing sort of like the second wave of tactical urbanism at this point, where, like thinking about the Lawn on D, which actually Truth to Ladies design, basically, right? And so ultimately, so you now have a major design firm designing a space that is actually, on a state budget, which was, probably not huge, but a real budget, not, using palettes to make little, it uses the aesthetics, but it has actually shifted in terms of the materials. And yes, the idea of, actually maybe I'll sort of put that out there. So how do the Pens kind of view that sort of shift in sort of strategy and how tactical urbanism is applied today versus 10 years ago? Or 8 years ago, even. Mike Lydon was 2011.
Yeah, and I can also kind of maybe comment on how it's great to see everybody getting in on the act. So the libraries, the Boston Public Library has the Bibliocycle, which is like a miniature mobile library on a bike trailer, basically, and they can show up at an event and kind of unfold and offer that for people, and it really just enlivens any space that it goes to, any event that it goes to. Food trucks, I think, 10 years ago, that food trucks were mostly at construction sites, right? They were very utilitarian, and it's really transformed kind of mobile food, temporary densification of an area with some activity that draws people. I think it's just been evolving so quickly, and again, from the public sector side, our regulations haven't evolved as quickly to allow for the innovation that we see happening in the sector. So it's really great to see now finally public sector is catching up, and you'll see places dedicated for food trucks and food truck parking zones and more of that licensing and all of that stuff. So it's great to see that evolution, and it's just much more of an accepted thing. Tactical urbanism, people understand what that is. Now as we upgrade infrastructure, we can make sure that there's a plug-in or that there's an anchor point or things that make it easier to pop up and less expensive to just have stuff come on a pretty quick basis.
I think it's interesting, too, to think about today and the social circumstance with social media. I think today's millennial, is much different than they were, back in the day, and the idea that, with crowdsourcing and the shared economy, it's really about putting these ideas out there first and then seeing how they end up being added onto. So it's really a dynamic sort of force that's really sort of starting to occupy our public spaces, and I think it's fascinating to see where it's going to go.
Our artists, how do you feel about sort of this type of shift in tactical urbanism? And actually, Janet, you were talking about sort of the use of cell phones as well with some of your projects and how that sort of changes the approach to your work, and maybe that's part of that shift, actually. Or where do you see it going ultimately?
Well, I think that's true for Chris as well, that The developments in technology are enabling members of the public to be interacting and co-creating with artists to shape and reshape the environment. One of my newest pieces is like a mood ring for the city. And this is a way of feeling that we are shaping the world that we live in, which is a driving factor in my work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal, one of the goals, is to give people a sense of ownership of their environment. And I often use the phrase, I try to give people a way to play with the architecture. You know, the buildings around us are pretty domineering, and we feel like very little sort of ants, especially walking across City Hall Plaza when nothing is here. So this turned out to be a very fantastic place to do temporary artworks that brought some human scale back to it, but also the interactive component allows people to actually be involved in the creative process. I think that idea is not necessarily new, but I think the technology, particularly the cell phone, is allowing that to become more prevalent, and I think that's important.
And of course, Isa and Christine, you designed the space at the convention center.
Yeah, containers. Can we talk about
containers?
containers?
Okay,
Containers
well,
are like
anything
popping
you want
up
to say,
everywhere,
yes,
which I guess is the
absolutely.
point. And so you guys have both worked with containers a ton. I'd love for you to talk about like what is that about?
I think really what it comes down to is not designing spaces that are too specific for any one type of activity, right? It's really about designing things that can be infinitely flexible because we don't know what people are going to come up with, what kinds of ideas people are going to come up with on how they want to use their public space. So it really, David, I don't know if you want to add to that, but you know, with Lawn on D, it was really about imagining. It's probably about the simplest landscape that somebody could design. It's the programming that really goes into activating it. And so the trick as a landscape architect or architect and when designing these types of spaces is just really imagining anything that could go in there and making sure that, you know, it's a blank slate with all the appropriate infrastructure that you would need for power, lighting, sound, and structural stability, I think, is a key one as well.
Yeah, the containers itself is really just the conduit for the art and the technology. You know, the idea that you can project on it, you can paint on it, you can walk through it, you can build it and create space with it. So it's the fortunate thing about it is they're very cost effective because there's so many of them, but the idea that you can then repurpose them and then they go back into the hopper for more in the future. So they're very repurposable, and it's turned out to be a tremendous asset for tactical urbanism.
Right. And of course, I mean, containers is also, that's another one of those tactical urbanism ideas, really, because, you know, think about Sail Boston, right? Sail Boston used containers in Boston for the first time in the Seaport District to create these temporary kinds of structures. I myself actually was in New Zealand, in Wellington, New Zealand in 2012, and it was the latest things. It's exact same thing as we're having right here. All these artists creating these temporary exhibits in containers. That was 5 years ago, right? So and then so you see them kind of traveling around, and actually I know that there have been entire architecture idea competitions about how to turn containers into permanent housing. I mean, so it's definitely a very popular subject. Realizing also that you know, we are living in a very tighter and tighter world, and people have often less and less resources, and especially in this country with the export deficit, they're basically, if you go down to New Jersey on the train, you pass these container yards with thousands of empty containers, so people are trying to figure out what to do with these things. So so it's actually a really good way of thinking about what you know, how can we creatively use these, because apparently it's too expensive to ship them back to the original countries empty. We have nothing to ship back to. That's where we are in this country. We sell services. We sell ideas around here. So that's what we're good at. Okay, so last question we have before we go to audience interaction here. Can there be such a thing as too much placemaking or tactical urbanism? And I mean, I just want to sort of like tie this to this one idea that somebody recently proposed, that the Fort Point Channel should be activated along the edge with these new marsh islands. and a soft green edge. And of course, the idea is also this should be, you know, a way to respond to the rising sea levels. But at the same time, I mean, you know, especially for somebody like me who's been living there for 22 years, to me, the channel body of water is the last refuge where you can rest your eyes from the totally built-out environment that surrounds it. And so I'm posing this question to everybody here, to you and everybody in the room as well, actually.
Yeah, you know, some people in the urbanism, urban arts kind of field have shifted the dialogue from placemaking to placekeeping, really honoring and recognizing this rapid pace of gentrification and displacement and neighborhood change that's happening in so many cities, Boston for sure. And this concept of keeping the identity of a place that's there and not losing it in the face of rapid neighborhood change. So I just want to kind of acknowledge that and introduce that concept of placekeeping. And then in Boston, for sure, a lot of the dialogue I've heard is about how to bring back that sensibility that's been lost from a place that has gone through wave after wave after wave of immigration and transformation and gentrification. How do you bring back the sensibility and the memory that Chinatown, for instance, which is being encroached upon in every direction, you know, there was a Lebanese neighborhood there that's been totally erased, you know, and Beacon Hill has the African American Meeting House, which does not erase the African American history of Beacon Hill. And so there's so many layers of this that are really worth exploring and discussing through our efforts to kind of honor these places where, you know, Boston is a really old city, so there's lots and lots and lots of layers of history, and whole populations have essentially been, the memory has been erased from places. And this is a worldwide issue, not just Boston, but it's a really interesting concept, I think, and I just want to kind of acknowledge that is there, and it's something we should think about.
Anybody else?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Nope.
I was going to say that, you know, from the real estate perspective, the thing that worries me the most is that developers that are working in vibrant cities like Boston that are growing exponentially as we speak are very, very keen to show that their development express this kind of forward-looking, advanced kind of architecture. And what's happening is that we're seeing kind of that expressed in the same way across the country and maybe even around the world, that architecture and places are all kind of looking the same. There's the, you know, national retail chains that just populate all of our streets, and monoculture, right? And so I think what we need to do is really encourage real estate developers to really embrace the local arts community. It's the one way to really show the local flavor of any city, any neighborhood, any town in this country, and let it be about people, right? About real people and real place.
Janet?
That's it. No, I'm eager to hear from the audience. I have nothing more to add.
Okay then, well, all right, I see a hand. Go ahead, and then the gentleman is in the back, yeah.
We'll repeat the question. Oh, you got a mic.
I'm going to name two locations that right now are... What?
Is that on?
Closer.
Is your mic
Oh,
on?
close.
Closer, yes.
Close to your mouth.
Okay, I'm going to name two locations that right now are not places, and sort of a lightning round of what you would do with them. One is Charles Gate, and the other is Sullivan Square.
Oh, who wants to take that one? Good question. Who does
So
this area?
Charles Gate
Yes.
is between the Back Bay area and the Fenway area, and it's that area that has a lot of the muddy river running through it in the overpass. And I think the Design Museum actually did a tactical hack to sort of figure out how to use those underutilized spaces. That one in particular is a fascinating one because I think it has an environmental opportunity because of resiliency and flooding to really create a naturalistic solution for that instead of something a little bit more hard and tactical. So, what was the other one? Yeah, Sullivan Square is another one that's just vehicular dominated. It has no pedestrian character at all.
I would actually point you to the Imagine Boston
Yeah,
2030 plan, which talks about Sullivan Square as possibly a place where it will be densified, it will be urbanized, and those sort of, you know, we used to build infrastructure really differently, and infrastructure would kind of tear through the fabric of the city. And like the Greenway, like you mentioned, stitching those places back together, I think that that's going to be a really important approach in Sullivan Square as it becomes less of a just a through, you know, you go right through. And, you know, we're a really rapidly growing city. We need to accommodate much more housing units, many more things. So I think that you're going to see Sullivan Square transformed. But I would say that one of the things I've really seen in Boston is that things develop with a real conversation with community, that there's so much community process and so much community dialogue. So it would be great actually to see you guys all get involved in what the future of Sullivan Square really ends up looking like.
There was a gentleman in the back.
Can you hear me now? I had a question about the value of duration for these types of events. And I know that tactile urbanism is generally more of a... Can you hear me now?
Value of what?
The value of duration. So whether it's a temporary or more of a permanent installation. And I know tactile urbanism is generally thought as a temporary and kind of a pop-up. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the success of temporary versus permanent installations and whether there's a benefit of either. What is the benefit of going temporary or permanent installation for these types of events?
Who wants to take that?
I can talk about anything for forever, as you can tell. We had like 3 minutes to talk about what I usually have an hour to talk about it. So yeah, the question was about the value of temporary versus enduring or lasting or permanent things. And I would say it's a real continuum, and there's a huge relationship. So we're doing residencies that last 6-8 months, a year, right? So there is this process and this conversation and this dialogue. And I would say that even though the residency only lasts a certain amount of time, that the impact on that community and the people who participate is ongoing and lasting. So there is that. We're trying to document the work in film so that we have a record of it. But I have to say that the fact that there was a residency there transforms not only the youth or the community members who participated, but it transforms the center that hosted a residency. And when we do a capital construction project at Harambe Park, it will be informed by the fact that there was an artist in residence there who did a temporary project, and then we'll have a budget to do a permanent public art project when we do the capital reconstruction. So I like to find as many relationships between the temporary and the permanent as we possibly can. It's not always possible, but I think it's exciting to explore that.
I could jump in there too. In my practice, I'm doing a great number of, quote, permanent works. And even those, I think about something that is always changing. The project I showed you in Phoenix is an ongoing work, but as it changes very slowly every night, and you have to spend the entire year to really fully see all of the color permutations. In the winter, it is using hotter colors, and in the summer, it's cooler colors. So, and then there are projects like the one in North Carolina that I showed you. They get ice storms, and so that piece is designed to be seasonal, like certain flowers. So every spring, the city has a celebration. They unfurl the sculpture. It's there for 3 seasons, and they take it down. It hibernates in the winter. And we developed a system where we install winches that are automatic, and in 1 hour, the regular park staff just takes it out. It goes away in like a giant Tupperware. And so it is a kind of continuum, and I think that artists are thinking about change even for works that are funded in a permanent way.
Chris, did you want to say something as well in terms of temporary versus permanent?
2 minutes. Why don't we
We have 2 minutes, and there were a few more questions.
I'm just going to say 2 things. The general sort of understanding in the field is that temporary is usually a way to try something out, to experiment, pilot project type things, where you don't have to worry about, you know, it's an easier permitting process in general as well. Permanent, it's there forever, theoretically, right? So you have to really be much more careful, and it takes a lot more planning. It's more expensive generally, too, so that's all I'm going to say. Okay, questions over here. And yeah, we'll go from the front to the back. And I mean, if anybody has time to stick around, we'll just go a little overtime. I'm fine with that. How are you doing? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Benya Kraus, and I'm a student at Tufts University studying international relations. And I'm curious because I'm reading a lot about cities in conflict, and I'm curious as to how urban placemaking and urban design can be a part of healing cities in conflict. So maybe if you could mention some projects that you've done where it took place in communities of conflict, how to create a place story when people have different ideas of what the identity of the place is. Thank you.
Can I mention one really cool project? There's an agency in New York called Creative Time who work on really exciting, you guys know Creative Time, right? And they did this project called the Conflict Kitchen, where it was a pop-up place where cuisine from places in conflict were served, and it just directly kind of helps you understand, like, oh, these are places where regular people live, and just by sheer luck, you're not one of those people who lives in those places, or maybe you are. And I just felt like it was an approach to humanize places of conflict and to really make kind of proximate and tangible places of conflict and really connect people. So it's just a project I know that does that. Again, it was temporary, but it made me think of that. And I know that there's a lot of actually architects who are involved in designing refugee camps like Shigeru Ban and the Tubes and all these places where they're really trying to help elevate people's lives, people who have been uprooted because of conflict. But you know, unfortunately, when you're just trying to feed people and get them water, a lot of times there isn't funding to help artists get back on their feet, and for art or music or any kind of culture to help uplift people who are going through these horrific ordeals. So I don't know, I wonder what else people have.
The artist JR has been working, for example, he went into the West Bank and different parts of Israel and the West Bank and took photographs of Israelis and Palestinians and made their faces like poster billboard size next to one another, showing that it was almost impossible to tell who was from which community.
Another one I can mention is actually Beirut. Nadim Karam, another architect and artist who basically, as a temporary year 2000 celebration in this really conflict-ridden city where people have been fighting for, well, 50 years, he basically created this parade of these large-scale concrete sculptures that were traveling sort of from the interior of the downtown city that was completely destroyed. So he basically built these concrete sculptures on top of the ruins, and then he moved them overnight and kept moving closer to the ocean. It was just like this parade, and people would find him in different places in the morning. And it was sort of like this element of surprise and just a way of trying to bring people together and have conversation about art instead of violence. Or, I mean, that's a great thing about art. It's a great way to make dialogue. And sometimes the dialogue can be very difficult. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure all of us have had those kinds of experiences, but it's very important and so incredibly nurturing. And yeah, we just need to be able to talk about things, and art is a great way to do that, absolutely. So does that answer your question? Okay, next row. Well, okay, go ahead. She has the mic.
Yeah,
That's
hi,
it.
I stole the mic, sorry. So I just wanted to give a quick comment and question. So my comment is a shout out for David, who I'm privileged to work with. And one of the things that I really loved that he brought to the master planning process for the hub here today is that he wanted people to be able to share the story of tactile urbanism and to have an immersive and interactive experience with it. So one of the tools he developed to make sure everyone got the most out of the hub was this great little AR card that I have, and some of my colleagues and I will be handing them out and demonstrating on the way out today. But it's a little card you can scan with a simple free app on your phone, and it pops up a virtual 3D model of the entire hub, all the domes and containers. And it's a way for you to show your friends where you were this weekend, but also talk about tactile urbanism and talk about how one simple City Hall Plaza became an innovation festival for 4 days. So that's my shout out for David, and also to let you all know that we'll be doing that and promoting his great work outside. And then my question for Christine and David and Isabel up there is how AR and VR, which I know both Sasaki and CBT are working with a lot, has transformed the way you're able to visualize projects, and how you think that might help you integrate the arts into architectural projects.
Yeah, sure. So we're using VR more and more in our office as a design tool, because there's nothing like experiencing the real space as you're designing it, and you can test out things in an infinite way, right? Everything from understanding how a space feels during different times of the day, how different lighting aspects can affect a space, it's, how things sound. You could actually test out the acoustics of a space. So VR has really become almost like a necessary tool for us when we're designing. And so again, I'd like to invite you all. I know there are many VR opportunities here at HUBweek, but try to catch our Eye of the Storm VR before it closes at 5. It's pretty cool.
Any other responses to that?
Isabel, but you would have preferred to do the actual installation.
We would absolutely prefer to do the
that is
actual
not gonna be
There's
the
no
VR.
substitution for
There you
real.
go. There you go. You can't beat the real world, right?
So let's see, I think who's the lady in the second row is very desperate, and the gentleman in the first row as well. And there's one more lady, I think those are the last 3 questions now. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my name's Christina. When I think of really vibrant cities with vibrant art scenes, I often think of like New York, LA, Montreal, Berlin, Chicago, one of the things that I miss in Boston that I see in those places is a vibrant street art culture scene, and I wonder from the city or from other artists on the panel, what can be done in Boston to liberate certain spaces or blocks of spaces in the city to allow artists more organically, rather than through the very fine programming on Law on D that's much more regulated, to just organically express the, the flavor of the city.
I think we understand the question, yeah.
I can actually set up Julie, because we've had this conversation many times, and when I go on vacation to those cities that you're talking about, my daughters and I go on graffiti hunting, and we actually take pictures of it, and I email them and I text them to Julie, and we say, we need more of this in our city. Here's the segue.
Yeah, so actually, my office has a muralist who creates murals, probably about 7 or 8 a year, with youth and teaches them how to do murals. Many of them go on to become muralists, indeed. And actually, we've issued a tremendous number of calls for artists. Just last weekend and the weekend before, there were 5 artists in the Grove Hall neighborhood of Dorchester doing murals and basically street art. They're getting money to do it. And so I think that the thing I've observed about Boston is there are a lot of murals and street art in certain neighborhoods. It's not everywhere, right? Because Boston has a lot of historic districts and a lot of historic buildings that don't happily accommodate this kind of use. So it's pretty much concentrated in certain neighborhoods and certain areas. Oh, she wants to comment back. Okay.
And I love those murals. I know a lot of them in the
That's cool.
In like DSNI's area, the neighborhood around there. But those are historic murals, and you're not meant to paint over them, and they're not meant to be palimpsests. These spaces that are more palimpsestic and organic, I think, are the ones that are missing in Boston, and the ones that get photographed and then they go away. So the ephemeral quality of them is very important. So it's an idea that I'd love to talk to your arts hotline about activating.
Once again, that number is 635 ARTS, and her name is Julia Ryan. And here's the thing: we need partners. City government, we're tiny. We have a little bit of money, and we know that there's a tremendous number of awesome organizations out in Boston. And the thing is, go for it. You want to create an art wall? We will work with you to create an art wall. Don't wait for us to do all of them. We want to work with you. We can maybe loosen the permission, make it happen. I just saw our fabulous, I'm going to make a shout out to our Chief of Streets, Chris Osgood out there, who's been an incredible partner with the Arts Department. And actually, we've created guidelines, and we've permitted several street painting, where people are painting on the street, which is kind of like the latest frontier. There's about 4 or 5 of them that exist in the city. And so we absolutely want to loosen regulations. We absolutely want to help make it happen. I say to all of you guys out there, go for it. Go for it. Don't wait for us to be the ones who do it. Go, seek us out as a partner and a funder and an enabler, but you can't wait for permission. You've got to be a partner with us.
I mean, all you need is, and actually I have to say, I think there actually are a lot of street performers here in Boston. South Station, the Music Man with his bear costume, go in front of Faneuil Hall, 24 hours a day almost. There's street art happening there every single day of the week, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing. And then HUBweek, of course. Music in the City Hall Plaza steps yesterday. I saw this fabulous jazz quartet with saxophone, Megalopolis. Fabulous, unbelievable. It's out there. You just go have to, I mean, maybe only downtown, but that's pretty much what happens in all cities. Street artists tend to be where people go. So the places that are kind of occupied by people tend to be the ones that are chosen by street performers as well. The people on their drums and with the bucket drumming. I mean, there's plenty going on, seriously. Anyway, anything, let's go to the next question maybe. Can we do that?
Hi, I attended a seminar by, I think it was 5 of the museum directors in Greater Boston a couple weeks ago at Radcliffe, and they were talking about art of the present and how their museums care for and preserve the art in the Greater Boston. And it didn't come up very much, I don't think at all, about public art in Boston, either temporary or permanent. And I'm wondering from the perspective of this audience, whether or not this panel, whether or not they see any interplay between the two entities.
Well, the Harvard and, you mean Harvard, interplay between Harvard University and Boston, or?
Design museums. No, the major
museums. Design museums,
the major museums.
Right. Yeah, well, right. Great idea.
Yeah, I mean, the
takes
MFA,
initiative, right?
Last summer, the MFA did the fabulous, like, inflatable fruit tree thing at Faneuil Hall, which I think is without precedent. I haven't been there that long, so I thought it was without precedent, but it was fabulous. And they also did the flower on the front. So I think they're starting to have that appetite for bigger, large-scale temporary pieces for sure. The ICA, not the ICA, the Gardner commissions new public art for their building every year. ICA's done Vita Brevis. They've done a ton of stuff. So I think they've done it. And it seems like they're continuing to do it.
I have a question, maybe
go
for
ahead,
Julie. Many cities that have been mentioned have a Percent for Art program for all public works, and many cities, like my new commission for the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood, is for private development. So all private development has to spend 1% on art for the public. What's the chance of getting these types of things here? We're all seeing a lot of development in Boston and not a lot of new public artworks.
Yeah, so as some of you may know, that the city of Boston capital construction budget is dedicating a percentage of that whole capital construction budget for permanent public art when we renovate or build a new public building. So we're doing that, which is so exciting. And I think leading by example is going to be incredibly powerful for the private sector. But we're seeing developers like Steve Samuels step up and just unveiled a couple of weeks ago this phenomenal piece. Actually, it's a number of pieces in front of the Point, right there facing the Landmark Center. The Landmark Center is going to have a major piece of public art in that sort of park that he's creating. So fantastically, we're seeing private developers step up and do this willingly, but it is part of the discussion, and how do we leverage our incredible development boom for the benefit of not only permanent public art, but also to see cultural spaces embedded and carved out into these new developments. And I think that, you know, it's a partnership between the BPDA, city government, the development community, the design community. You guys are thought leaders with your clients to say, hey, this is super important to do. And it's really not about the money. It's such a small amount of money in comparison. Like, you build a skyscraper for $100 million, you know, $500,000 for art, that's like a rounding error, right? So really having thought leadership, it is basically, having it embedded in the design process. And these discussions actually really help to change people's minds about what's the right way to do development.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, we have one last question, a lady in the green sweater. And thank you all. It was great having you. Thanks for sticking with us. I had fun. I hope you did too. Thank you to the panelists, to HUBweek, to the city. Thank you.
Okay, I should have jotted down. So many things have come up for me. Somebody was talking about Placekeeping. As somebody who grew up in Brighton, I have to say there are stakeholders above and beyond who lives in exactly the neighborhood. I have a stake in what happens in Jamaica Plain. And there's an institutional, as it were, if you think of the city as an institution, so institutional memory is, and I'm not being really articulate because I should have jotted it down, but in the rush to development, and I think you were thinking about it at the same time, there's a whole thing about a world-class city. My thought is if you build a world-class city, will it look like every other city in the world? And we are going that way of homogenization and monoculture. So it's this institutional memory, and I think education among the developers who are here at HUBweek is so important, because I was talking to someone about that, because if it looks like every other city in the world, who would come here if you would go to a city 20 miles away that looked just like this, except for museumification, and I've made up that word, of a city where, oh yes, there's a Boston, you know, and we have this and this is Boston, and people will come to Boston as a museum. Those particular places will be the museum.
No, I think I understand. Do you understand the question? So the idea that basically that you need a sort of a unique environment in each city, right? That each city should have its own kind of identity, right?
And
exactly, right. So anybody wants?
I had somebody really, one of the developers really said, when I said, well, who would come there? Well, some people won't come here, but some people will come because it's changed. And it's like there's a lot of education necessary. And I'll just say one more thing, that Harry Belafonte's daughter has an organization called Sankofa, which is the name of a bird, and the name means go back and get it. Doesn't mean go back and stay there, which is nostalgia. It means go back. You have to have that route before you know where you're going. So that's something that we need to think of.
In a way, you're actually sort of like already segueing to another subject, which is really more about city identity. We're sort of here for the tactical urbanism piece, but if anybody wants to respond to the kind of question, Julie?
I'm going to set Julie up again. Yeah. I guess one of the things that's great is that Julie's actually been tasked with putting together the city's first arts and cultural plan. We've never had one before, and so she's brought in to really capture that by the mayor. What she did with the Boston Creates, though, is each of the groups actually reached out to separate communities to identify what those aspects of each community was important. So, Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a tremendous number of issues. And I will say, you know, I'm new to Boston, and I bring here experience from Chicago, another city. And I have to say, the way that development is done here is so engaged with the community in comparison to Chicago, where I came from, where the community, there really is not the kind of deliberative, ongoing dialogue with abutters and neighbors and community organizations and constituents. It's so different in other cities. And so I know it can always be better, and we need to really talk to so many different constituents. But I just have to say, my experience from coming from another city is that we do a lot of process here, and people really are listened to, and they do have a voice. And I think that we're a better city for it, and we build in a better way. It takes much, much longer to get something built here. It's much more expensive because it takes longer, but what we end up with, I think, is far better and reflects the desires of the community, reflects the city much more authentically than what I've seen in other places.
What a wonderful closing statement. Thank you. So we'll close the session. Thank you again. Feel free to come up and talk to us. I do have the Placemaking manifesto event flyers if you want one, and we're loving having you. Thank you.